You ever see a shoe laying beside the highway or a rural road and get the creeps? It's always just one shoe, mind you. You never really see a pair. How did it get there? Whose was it? Why did they leave it behind? Your mind can supply its own answers to these questions. My mind's answers always seem to be sinister. How could they not be? A single shoe laying in the dust of a forgotten ditch? Is there a sadder sight? Is there a scarier one? I was on my way to my girlfriend's cottage, which was up by Lindsay. It was a long weekend and I was looking forward to it. The problem was I'd only been there once. Luckily for me, somebody invented GPS. Unluckily for me, the batteries were almost dead. I was heading down a rural road when the paved road gave way to a dirt road. I decided I'd better check the direction again on the GPS and maybe write the directions down in case the batteries died on me. I was driving my brother's old Nova, and it didn't exactly have a cigarette lighter or any way to keep the GPS charged. Apparently, they hadn't thought of charging GPS or phones in your car in 1969. I stopped the car on the side of the road and looked around for a pen or a scrap of paper to write on. I finally pulled a pen from under the seat and ripped open a Tim Hortons cup just in time to watch my GPS go dead. I tried to remember as much of the electronic directions as I could, but all I could really remember was that I had to keep going down the same road, which was called Old Marsh Road. After that, it was anybody's guess. I noticed that the sun was getting quite low. I thought it best to get moving. I could find someone to give me directions, but I wasn't getting anywhere sitting there. I turned the ignition key. Nothing. I tried a few of the tricks I'd seen my brother do, but I didn't have a knack for it. It takes at least a couple of breakdowns before you even start developing a knack for these things, so I figured I better start walking. I tried to find a phone so I could call for a tow. I put the GPS under the seat since it was of no use to me now, and I didn't want anyone to smash the window to steal it. I decided to keep walking in the same direction I was driving because I hadn't seen anything that could possibly help me in the direction that I had come from. Just a field that went as far as the eye could see, with solar panels looking like row upon rows of satellite dishes. I didn't really want to walk back towards the solar fields, partly because I had seen far too many episodes of The X-Files, and it looked like a likely spot for an alien attack. Thinking back, I should have taken my chances with the aliens. First bad omen came as I was getting out of the car. As I was getting up, I stepped on something and almost lost my footing. I took a look down to see what I had tripped on. A little pink and purple shoe. The grime and dust of the road had almost completely obscured its colors. I gave the shoe a little kick, checked that the car was locked, and headed off into the growing darkness. I tried my best to keep up with the sun, but in the end I watched it go down over the crest of a hill. And then I kept walking, off into the dark. I couldn't tell you how long I walked before I saw the small farmhouse. I felt like I was in some kind of timeless zone. I didn't have a watch with me. Just the rhythm of my breath against the beat of my feet, and how those two things together can put you in a bit of a trance. It was total darkness now, and maybe that was the only reason I could see the tiny light poking through the trees that lined the side of the road. I decided that I'd better check it out and see if there was a phone I could use to call my girlfriend or a tow truck. As I started down the farmhouse road, something caught my eye. The shadowy shapes of the trees by the farmhouse road were mostly thin around the trunk and spindly around the branches, but one tree in particular seemed too black against the sky, and its blackness was much too thick. I approached the tree, and as I got closer, my eyes started to make out the mottled and patched quality of the trunk. At closer range, I started to make out colors that didn't seem to fit the greens and browns usual for a tree. I started to see reds, blues, pinks, and purples. I reached out my hand in the darkness to touch the trunk of the tree and felt something strange. I expected to feel wood, but I pulled my hand back quickly when I felt that the trunk of the tree was leather. I closed my eyes tightly and counted to 30, trying to work up a little night vision. This was a little trick I learned at summer camp. When I opened my eyes again, I could make out a red swoosh, a Nike swoosh. On a tree? I stepped back so I could take in the newly revealed details of that strange tree. There was a mound of shoes that I'd mistaken for leaves piled around the base. All different colors, styles, and sizes. The shoes didn't end at the mound though. As I scanned up the trunk of the tree, I could see that someone had driven nails through the shoes. Whoever had done it had driven one long spike through each shoe and attached them to the tree. There was enough of them to cover the entire surface of the tree trunk. I looked up further and saw shoes had been nailed much higher than a human could reach, all the way to the top. Some of the branches had single shoes hanging from them, and the whole sight of this strange tree began to make me feel like I better find another place to look for a phone. I took 2 steps back, taking in the details of the tree with what could only be described as a mixture of revulsion and awe. I heard a strange noise coming from the road leading to the dark farmhouse. It sounded like a combination of bees buzzing and a playing card being hit by the spokes of a bike. Soon I discovered that was exactly what the sound was. Bees and playing cards. I looked back down the road towards the farmhouse, and the light from the window had somehow moved down to the farmhouse road. Even stranger, there was now 2 lights instead of 1, side by side. They looked like headlights, but they were swerving back and forth like they were being driven by a drunk. I wasn't exactly paralyzed, but for some reason I just stood there watching the light swerve back and forth, the strange buzzing sound getting louder. I began to hear a strange chanting rising above the buzz. As the lights got even closer, I could begin to see that they weren't headlights at all, but 2 flashlights taped to either side of a strange man's head as he was riding a rusted BMX bike down the dark farmhouse road. As he got closer, more details revealed themselves. He had a bike tricked out like he was a 10-year-old. There were tassels streaming from the handlebars. There were playing cards taped into the path of the spinning spokes, making part of the strange noise I was hearing. He was even towing a red wagon behind his bike. His repeated chant was getting louder as he approached. Although I could now hear his chant clearly, I definitely could not comprehend what he was chanting. It sounded like Ram Abla Sur Ram Sustak Maze Ram Sustak Sur Taut, over and over again, louder and louder as he approached. I raised my hand in some form of greeting as he came even closer on his weird bike, made even weirder by the fact that I could now see that he was wearing a full beekeeper's mask and coveralls and gloves. The buzzing sound only got louder. "Hey, I'm having a little car trouble. Do you have a phone I could use?" All he replied was, "Ram habala sur ram sustak, maze ram sustak sutout." "I'm stranded. Can you help me?" That seemed to snap the man out of his chanting trance. He cocked his head to the side like a dog trying to understand. Then he began to remove his flashlight headgear and beekeeper's mask. As he took off his mask, I could see bees escaping from inside of his collar, flying out into the night. Was he wearing a beekeeper suit with the bees on the inside? It didn't make any sense at all. As he revealed his face to the darkness and bees kept escaping his suit, he asked, "Do you speak the high speech?" I could see his face was a mound of bee stings, one on top of the other. Some were leaking rivulets of pus and blood down his swollen face. "I just speak English, bud. A little French," I replied. "Ah, the low speech then. I thought you might be a traveler like me," I replied. "I'm traveling, but I doubt much like you." I looked at his swollen face again, dripping with pus and blood from an untold multitude of bee stings. "Hey, maybe you should call an ambulance. It looks like you've been stung. Stung a lot." His eyes gleamed through his swollen cheeks and face brightly. "The bees give their spikes to me. I accept them. I need my spikes, so I can welcome him at his coming, at the time of my rising, by apotheosis." I was very unnerved at this point, but I still asked foolishly, "Do you have a phone?" "I have no phone. I have my shoes and my bee and my dreams of the cactus, the great cactus of woe." I could see the little wagon he was towing was mounted with dirty shoes, just like the one I had nearly tripped on. just like the ones nailed to that foreboding tree.
A lot of misery power held in those dirty shoes left by the side of the road.
The man exclaimed with glee.
I collect them, nail them to my tree.
I took a step back. As you can see, I've still got both my chucks. The strange man reached down to a sheath strapped to his bicycle, pulling a long knife free.
Well, misery can be manufactured.
With that, I bolted back down the farmhouse road as fast as I could, listening to his cackle laugh. As I reached the road, I could hear him yelling,
When he comes, the ground will be blood, the skies will be green, the rivers will be run over with mescaline. Mescaline.
I reached the road quickly. I stood behind the tree so the bee man couldn't see me and took a look back to see how close he was following. He was closer than I imagined, with the flashlight strapped to his head making his knife gleam through the darkness. He was moving fast, and leaving my hiding spot would just reveal my location to this crazed man. I kicked off one of my shoes and threw it down the road in the opposite direction of my brother's broke-down car. I prayed that he didn't see the shoe flying, and that he thought I had just lost it running in that direction. With that, I dove into the mound of shoes at the base of the tree and began covering myself with as many of the relics as I could. I tried not to breathe and looked out from under the shoes as much as I dared. I saw the man pull his bike up to my thrown shoe and slowly bend over to pick it up. He then raised the shoe to his face and lifted his beekeeper's mask the same way Spider-Man would kiss MJ. Instead of kissing a beautiful redhead, he was instead sniffing my shoe like a dog would, letting out little pants of glee as he sniffed. Before he started down the road in the direction of my tossed shoe, he stuck his swollen bee-stung tongue out and ran it lengthwise across the bottom of my sole. He then let out a shudder of pure ecstasy and tossed the shoe into the back of his wagon. He rode down the street and I stayed hidden under all the shoes. After he was out of sight, I swear I could still hear that playing card in the spokes of his bike. And the bees, the buzz of the bees. When I dared, I left the shoe pile and started to make my way back to my brother's car. I didn't have much of a plan, but at least I was heading in the opposite direction of that man. I stuck mostly to the ditches by the side of the road. More than a few times on my way back to the car, I dove into the ditch to hide. Each time I was triggered by the buzzing of a lone bee. I felt a little bit like Frodo hiding from the ring wraiths. When I finally saw my brother's car, the sun was beginning to rise. My shoeless foot was swollen and blistered. Though I had no faith that the car would start, I sat down behind the driver's seat anyway, if only to rest my swollen foot. I watched the sun begin to rise over the crest of the trees and decided to try starting the car again. Perhaps the sunrise beamed some hope down on me, or perhaps it was straight up luck. Either way, when that engine roared to life, I just started laughing. I was still laughing as I drove past that shoe tree. Even though I gunned the engine while passing it, I could still see my yellow Chuck Taylor, size 12, nailed right to the center of the trunk. It wasn't until I finally reached my girlfriend's cottage later that day that I discovered what was under the car seat. As I reached down to recover the GPS, I felt a familiar texture. Again, leather. Somehow that little bad omen shoe, pink and purple, that I had tripped on was resting against the GPS. That I tripped on was resting against the GPS. That I tripped on was resting against the GPS. Against the GPS.